So a warm welcome to each one of you, and such a treat always to get to practice together and to see your faces. And so this is the Sunday morning program, and so Sunday morning East Coast time, East Coast US time, could be afternoon or evening where you are. And I'd like to just follow our usual format of about 10 minutes or so of guided meditation. And then I'll offer a Dhamma talk for about 30 minutes or so, and then leave some time for reflections, questions, concerns at the end. And so today I think we will focus on the 4 elements. And it's short in 10 minutes, so we may just do 1 or 2 of them rather than all 4, but let's see how we do. Yeah, come on in, right. So beginning by establishing your relaxed and upright meditation posture. Feeling the weight of the body on your seat. And from that stable base, allowing the bones of the spine to align. All the way up through the neck. And because the bones are carrying the weight of the body, perhaps the muscles of the neck and the shoulders and the chest, and soften and widen. And opening the attention to the whole body at once. The whole body from head to toe. And aware of this body as earth. Every cell in the body contains some carbon, some solid, earthy substance. And now you're shifting the attention to the earth element beneath you. So whether you're sitting or standing or lying down, there's some earthy element below you. And knowing that that outer earth element and the inner bodily earth element are the same earth. And then again, turning the attention to the whole body, aware of the body as pervaded by air. Every cell in the body as oxygen. This light, spacious quality. And then one last shift, turning the attention to the air around you and above you. Becoming aware of air in the room. And knowing that air externally and air internally is the same element. Beautiful. So that brings us to the next portion of our program, which is the Dhamma talk. Pardon me. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. A few weeks back, one of our other teachers here at Dassanaya, Stephen Steiner, was giving a talk, and he shared a story about a very beloved Japanese poet named Ryokan. And there are many beautiful stories about Ryokan. He was, if I'm remembering correctly, like early 19th century. I have the book here, I could look it up, but in any event, he wasn't too long ago, comparatively speaking, compared to some of the folks we often talk about. But the story is that there was a thief who came into his hut, and he didn't really have anything to give the thief except what he was wearing. So he gave the thief his clothes, and then he wrote this haiku, he wrote this poem about that experience. And the poem goes like this. The poem is very short because it's a haiku, and it's not exactly a haiku in English, so bear with me here. I don't think. I didn't count the syllables. Left behind by the thief, the moon in the window. Left behind by the thief, the moon in the window. Meaning that he would have even given the moon to the thief if he could have. No? So you can imagine Ryokan there, kind of half-dressed, or maybe not so well covered in his little hut by himself after the thief leaves. And I thought about that story in a different way, hearing it that time. Sometimes you hear a story many times, or you hear a teaching many times, and then there's something new that comes out of it. And what I thought about was, what if Ryokan had been a woman? And the thief was a man. And if Ryokan started taking her clothes off, would that story still sound the same to us? Would that story still have the same outcome or the same kind of romanticism to us? I think that would be quite a different story with maybe a different ending. And I've been thinking about, the issue of women in Buddhism and the voices of women in Buddhism and the experiences of women in Buddhism quite a bit, in part because I'm a member of the board and an officer of the Soto Zen Buddhist Association. So it's a group of ordained folks here in the States and in other parts of the world who get together and talk about Buddhist practice and what are the supports that we need to be teachers and leaders of our sanghas, and or to be developing into that. And the theme of women's voices has been a theme for us throughout the year. And so I thought, it'd be good. I wonder if I could find a story of a woman and a thief. And then sure enough, in the precept study group, we came across a story of a woman and a thief. And so I wanted to tell you that version of how it might go. And I want to acknowledge that there might be any number of other genders, and how would the interaction be if it was a woman and a woman, or if it was a non-binary person and a non-binary person, or a non-binary person and a man, and so on. There are so many different shades of experience that might happen here. But I have this particular beautiful story of this woman teacher, nun, so I want to share that with you today and talk a little bit about the meaning of it and how it's a bit different, but also in some ways the same as the Ryokan story. So this is from a book called The Mind of Clover by Robert Aiken. And Robert Aiken was the Roshi. He was the teacher, the guiding teacher at a Sangha out in Hawaii many years ago. He died many years ago now. And but his writings, one of his books was the first book I ever read, the first Buddhist book I ever read, and actually inspired me to identify as a Buddhist and begin to practice meditation back in the 80s. So I really appreciate Aiken Roshi. And this is his book about practicing with the precepts, with ethical precepts, and also ethical eco-dharma and many other topics. He kind of ranges widely here. But so this is his chapter about non-greed. Non-greed. And so the tale is like this. Jimon, Reverend Jimon, or Aya Jimon, or Jimon Ni, as she might have been known, was a nun who lived in Japan in the 18th century. So Ni would be the Japanese word for identifying her as a nun. One cold night, a thief came into her hut looking for something. Without getting excited at all, she arose and said, "How miserable it must have been to cross the fields and mountains to come here on such a cold night. Wait a minute and I'll get you something warm." She made some gruel for him, so some rice soup, or soupy rice, or soupy, it's probably not oatmeal in Japan, it's most likely to be rice, especially at that time, and had him sit down by the fire. She said to him, "I have given up the world, so I don't have anything of value, but please take anything you want. In exchange, I have something to tell you. I've been looking at you, and it seems to me that whatever you do, you will not have a hard time making a living. So isn't it a shame that you have fallen into such a low state and disgraced not only yourself, but your family as well? Please reform your outlook and give up this business of burglary. Take whatever I have and sell it to get capital to do any kind of work which suits your ability. You will be much easier in mind, or you will have more ease in your mind." And the thief was so impressed that he left without taking anything. So maybe he felt he already had enough, suddenly felt like he already had enough capital or enough of what he needed. And what appeals to me about this story, there are many things that appeal to me about this story, but what I want to talk about today that appeals to me about this story is her sense of empathy for this person, right? She, right away, without even considering whether that person had empathy for her, she has empathy for their experience. It must have been cold. It's a long way to her hut from wherever that person might have been coming from, because she lives kind of maybe in a faraway place in the forest somewhere on the mountain. And that was what really informed her generosity. And not just the material generosity, like, oh, I'll feed you. There are many Christian stories also very much like this also, right? Of feeding the stranger. There's a, oh, I can't even remember the name of the philosopher. We studied this at one point, who talks about seeing seeing God in the face of another that you don't know, of a stranger. But in any event, it's this empathy that she has for this person that gives her, that sort of undergirds, that is the foundation for her spirit of generosity with them, right? She's trying to understand what they're experiencing. And that helps her to be generous. Generous with the food, generous with offering anything she has in her place, which isn't going to be much, as she said. It's a hut, you know. She's somebody who has given up a lot of her worldly things. But then she gives the most generous gift of all, right? She gives a teaching. She says, oh, but you're going to have to listen to me for just a moment. And she gives this teaching, right? The Dhamma is the most generous gift of all. Why? Because the Dhamma is something that cannot be lost. So all the material things, they will be lost sooner or later, right? We lose even our bodies. We lose everything sooner or later. But the Dhamma is this kind of experience that has an effect on our karmic stream, or the sort of momentum, you could say the energetic momentum that goes even beyond this lifetime. So for that reason, the Dharma is more valuable than even the most precious of jewels, material, physical jewels. And the Dhamma that she teaches him is also very encouraging, right? Very encouraging. I see that you could, you could stop stealing. You could do something different, something slightly less harmful with your life. She really tries to encourage him and to give him whatever, again, whatever tools or things might be helpful for that to be true. But it's this final teaching that is actually, for me, the most moving, which is that you'll be much easier in mind. You'll have more ease in your mind, right? It's not, it doesn't sound to me, we don't know her, her motivation because we're not in her head, but it doesn't sound to me like she's moralizing here, right? She's saying, if you go this way, if you choose these kinds of things to do with your life, instead of the kinds of things that you're doing right now, maybe you choose something different, then you'll feel better in your heart and mind. And that teaching is very fundamental to Buddhism, right? That is a teaching whose thread we see all the way back to the original Buddha. The original Buddha saying, ethics is fundamental. Ethics is something that we have to practice if we expect to have any ability to meditate. He said, an unethical mind is so agitated that it has difficulty grasping the practice. Right? Even if you don't feel remorse, there are people who are doing really harmful things in the world, who are doing very unethical things in the world and don't feel remorse. And still, we see that they're quite agitated, right? They're quite agitated in trying to defend their position or in trying to rebuff the people who are trying to stop them, or in trying to not experience the consequences of that bad behavior. There are all kinds of ways. And then, of course, there is the actual remorse and regret that people feel sometimes much later. You know? So she's not even giving this person a hard time about being a thief. She's just saying, wow, you have options. And those options might be better for you. You might actually sleep better at night if you chose a different way. And so this way of empathy is very much embedded in the understanding of ethics as we practice it within Buddhism. That in order for us to take up this way of harmlessness, we need to be conscious of, tuned into, what is the impact of what we're doing and saying and thinking in the world, right? And that opens up also a safety and a clarity for ourselves, this kind of empathy, right? Even though we can't know perfectly what's going on in someone else's mind or how something is going to land, right? We should always check in also. So according to Buddhism, both intention and impacts are important. Not one or the other, but both, right? So when you see, for example, people talk about this in social justice work, or if I make a mistake and I say something harmful to someone or racist to someone, and that person says to me, oh, you shouldn't, that hurt me when you talk that way, or you didn't realize that that's a harmful thing to say. I might say, right, that wasn't my intention, but actually that's not if I were to say that, I don't do that anymore, because that's actually only part of the story. The intention, right? The actual impact is also something that we need to address. So this aspect of empathy goes even further, though, than the ethics of our practice. And it goes to the heart of, I want to suggest, to the heart of the teachings. So the Buddha described the teachings as the Four Noble Truths. He said, I could sum up everything that I learned by awakening in these Four Noble Truths. So the first truth is the truth that there is suffering. There is suffering. And the second truth is that there is a cause of suffering. And the cause of suffering is our wanting things to be other than as they are. And then there is a cessation of suffering. There's a way to the end of suffering. There is the end of suffering. That's the third. And then the fourth one is there is a way to the end of suffering, and the path of practice is the way to the end of suffering. Now, I'm using this word suffering for dukkha. Many of you know that the Pali word dukkha is more complex than that. It means unsatisfactoriness of life, or various other ways. The simile that's used is, it's like if you have a wheel. So back in those days, a wheel on a cart, it was described as if you had a wheel on a cart and the center hole of the wheel is in the wrong place. So the wheel, every time it goes around, it goes ka-thunk, ka-thunk, ka-thunk. Like sometimes you might go to the grocery store and you get one of those wonky grocery store cars. It goes ka-thunk, 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 and it makes a lot of noise, and it's a little hard to push like that. That's dukkha, that kind of out of kilterness of life. And so and I've mentioned this many times, and I will say it again today, the Buddha suggested various sort of tasks or ways of approaching each one of these truths. And the way to approach the truth of dukkha, the truth of suffering or wonkiness or unsatisfactoriness, is to understand it. And so when we practice empathy with others, that is also our practice of understanding dukkha. Not just our own experience of how the world is wonky or not wonky or unsatisfactory or painful and outright suffering, but others' experience as well of how that is, that that's true for them. And that there is a reason and a cause of our suffering and their suffering, and that there is cessation of suffering. So one of the things that was true for me when I first started practicing Buddhism was that I assumed that when I heard these Four Noble Truths, that when it said the end of suffering, that meant like the whopping total end of suffering, right? Like full, all-on enlightenment, like the Buddha. And yes, it means that, but it also means moment by moment, right? We can see in our lives, moment by moment, end of suffering. And we don't want to see that sometimes. Sometimes we want to really cling on to the fact that we're suffering, and we want to see it as going on and on and on, and we hold on to it and we bring it in again and we remember it again. But it's useful to also see that our life is also filled with moments of the end of suffering. So I'll give you another example here. So I was in Japan. We were practicing this very, very difficult winter takuhatsu practice. So takuhatsu is a time when we go out and we collect donations. And in the winter there at Hoshinji, my master's temple, my ordination teacher's temple, it's very cold and very snowy. And the winter practice is that we go out every single day for 29 days in a row, no matter what's happening. In the middle of a blizzard, in the middle of rain, in the middle of clear sunny days, it doesn't matter. We go and we go into the town. We go on a 3-hour walk with about a 20-minute break in the middle. You're not allowed to wear gloves. And so on. It's a very physically demanding practice. And it's different every day, let's put it that way. It's different every day. The weather depends, who you run into sometimes helps or doesn't help, and so on. And so I was in my room with my friend and senior nun, Kokyo-san, and I was saying to her, we got back from the winter rounds that morning, and so it was after lunch, and so we're there in our room doing some study and things. And I said to her, oh, my knee was hurting at the beginning of the walk. And I was really kind of worried because I thought, gosh, if the walk hurts like this the whole way, this is going to be very difficult on me. But then it went away. And Kokyo-san nodded her head and she said, yeah. And she said something about some pain that she'd also had somewhere in her body. And she said, yeah. And it changes every moment, right? It could change in any moment. And that was how, she worked with doing this very physical practice, was to remind herself about the possibility or the actuality of the end of moments of suffering right there. In this moment, in this moment, in this moment. Right? Coming to an understanding and to an ability to be present with what's actually true about our lives and true about the lives of others. And when we do that, then the practice of ethics and the practice of deep understanding of the nature of a human life becomes very natural. It's right here. It's right here. And we're all working with these things. So why create more harm? Why not help someone to see a way to peace in their mind and their heart? Just a little bit, or maybe a lot. Just like our nun, Reverend Jimon, Venerable Jimon, said to her friend, the thief, yeah, I see you. I see you. And I see that you could have this peace too. So thank you all for your lovely attention today, your practice. That's what I wanted to share with you. So now we have a bit of time, maybe 15 minutes or so, for any kinds of reflections, comments, questions, concerns about the talk or about the meditation. Yes, Sharanya.
So thank you for that wonderful story. I think what really struck me was something you said early on about how when we try to practice the virtues, a lot of times we're of the mindset of having it be reciprocated in some kind, right? And I've noticed that while it is easier for me to do random acts with strangers, those people that I see either week in and week out, when I notice that maybe they don't share some of the same empathy or generosity, I find that my motivation kind of dwindles. And then I have a tendency to shift. So I just noticed that, and I suppose it's just part of the path, part of the practice, but I don't know if you had anything to say about that.
Yes. Well, thank you for that reflection, Sharanya. And I definitely understand that, it's some of those most intimate relationships that can be the ones that are asking the most of us. Yeah. And I would say, when you know that there is a boundless source of kindness in you, of generosity in you, right? When you have that boundless source in you, that it's not a resource that you need from someone else, then, right, it's okay if they give it or they don't give it. Because you know that you're not less by giving it either. You have a boundless resource. And in particular, I would say the Brahma viharas, so the practice of metta, right? The practice of loving kindness, practice of compassion, practice of joy, empathetic joy, and equanimity. Those things can really just show you, actually, how you have a boundless resource. Yeah. You can write it in the chat if you like. Yes, Sharanya, one more. Yes.
So just to follow up on what you said, right? So there are two ways of looking at it. One is in terms of qualities within ourselves, or the qualities we wish to perfect. And the other has to do with actually the material world that we live in. So, for example, I think all of us maybe, like I'm just thinking of the people I know who perhaps often or randomly have these thoughts that they're going to run out. And yet, when you look closely, you notice that actually that's not true, right? So I'm also wondering if these are just habits and taints of the mind that that interfere in cultivating these qualities.
Could be. I mean, in that case, so what that sounds like to me, and I've also seen that happen, that people can be very fearful about what will happen to them, if they give material things, for example. And on the one hand, you can say, yes, there are real differences for folks who don't have enough. That's a difficulty, and there are ways that we try to help out folks who don't have enough, hopefully. And again, it's like, what is enough, though, right? What is enough? And enough is for many people, like Venerable Jimon, or for many people in different parts of the world, it turns out to be something that we do in fact have, and that there's no question that we will have. So I wonder also about that, about kind of fears of what does it mean? What does it mean in terms of my identity or my position, if I have this thing or I don't have this thing, right? Or if I give too much. There are real differences that we need to be aware of, and we probably make a mistake if we let ourselves be driven by fear around that. I hope that's helpful, Sharanya. Is that meeting you where you are there? No.
Yeah, yes and no. So yes, in a sense that there are iniquities, and it's not just wealth, it's also attention, it's effort. It's like, where do you put your energies? How do you balance what I have to do for a living with my own practice, like all of it, right? And then, we do things like, say, volunteer at meals and meals, and then you see the other harsh reality of things as well. So so while I see more and more the law of cause and effect, and I see what it does to me to practice some of these things, you also, I think you also, the older you get, you kind of tend to reflect on your life more, and you see how there are certain conditions that are not present in your life that maybe someone else does have, right? So you think, oh, our karmas are different, where this person has these conditions to go on 3-month retreats, whereas maybe I do not have those conditions as well. And so there's a part of me that's also aware, just because of the pattern of my life, like, oh, maybe this is not something that's available to me because it hasn't been available to me for the past 50 years. And so, so in that sense, feeling like I have, in some ways, to even pay attention to what I see coming up over and over and over again in my life, through different people, through different stages of my life, and thinking that I have to make decisions based on these patterns that have been unfolding. And yet also recognizing that there is something called the Dhamma, and there's something that I have to continue to push against or work towards. So I don't know, just that.
Okay. All right. I see that you're making your stew. Yeah. Jimon was very motherly. Jimon was very motherly to the thief. Yes. I always say very nurturing. It could be that we would associate that with mothers, but it could be that we would associate that with fathers or with other people, right? She was definitely very nurturing to the thief in terms of wanting to care for them a little bit. And yes, reminds me of Dogen saying we should talk to people like we would speak to an infant. Like really, really, not like infantilizing people, but like really gently, really gently. All right, my friends, it looks like we've come to a natural pause here and we're almost at the end of our time. So a couple of brief announcements. One is this Saturday is the autumn gathering, and it's hybrid, so people can come online. People are very much encouraged to come in person if they can. It's an all-person gathering. It is a time for us to celebrate each other's generosity of heart and so many things. So I really hope that you'll be able to come to that Saturday. We're starting at 10:30 a.m. Eastern U.S. time, and we'll probably be just having like the potluck and the meal and stuff at that time. If you're online, you can come and we can interact with you online actually too, here in the room, and you can see people milling around and such. Or if you want to wait until the actual, there will be a short talk and a short ceremony and sharing of poetry or other expressions. And that'll start probably around 11:30 Eastern time. So just so you know. And what else? The Introduction to Buddhism online class. So that is a survey course, if you will, from before the Buddha was the Buddha, all the way through all the three branches of Buddhism. And we run through that in about 4 weeks or 5 weeks. I forget now which, how many weeks it is, but it's a short course. Sponsored by San Francisco Zen Center. So you can sign up for that. And what else? Many other things are happening. So keep your eyes on the website, if you will. And, I really appreciate that we are practicing together. And there's so much going on in the Sangha. Many people are practicing in smaller groups also, doing various other activities. So please feel like if you want to plug in a bit more, just contact me or well, I was going to say, or Kylie, but Kylie's not feeling well right now, right? So we're going to let Kylie be quiet for a bit. So just contact me if you want to get plugged into some other opportunities with the Sangha to practice. And then finally, yes, may the merits of our practice today really extend to all beings, known and unknown, seen and unseen. May it be one cause for their relief from all mental and physical dukkha. May all beings realize the truths of their lives and realize profound compassion for themselves and for others. By the power of the Buddhas, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and each one's efforts, may all beings be free. All right, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.